Name is on the deed. It has been on the deed since I was 26 years old, when my grandmother passed away and left me the only thing she had left to give, a small one-bedroom apartment in Portland on the third floor of a building that smelled like old wood and the lavender she kept in every windowsill. She bought it in 1987. She paid it off by herself. And when she died, she made sure it went to me, not to my parents, not to my brother. To me. I want you to understand that before anything else. Because what happened next only makes sense if you know that piece first. I was 29 when I took the job in Denver. It was a 2-year contract position with an urban planning firm, the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice, especially not for someone who spent 3 years freelancing out of a converted bedroom. My boss at the time told me I'd be an idiot to turn it down. My best friend told me the same thing. So I packed 2 suitcases, put the rest of my things in a storage unit on Burnside, and flew out in January. The apartment sat empty. That was always the plan. I wasn't ready to rent it out to strangers. My grandmother's reading chair was still there. Her dishes were still in the cabinet. Her handwriting was still on the little chalkboard next to the refrigerator where she kept her grocery lists. I wasn't ready to box all of that up for a tenant I didn't know, so I told my parents they could check in on it once a month, water the small succulent on the kitchen windowsill, make sure nothing was leaking or broken. That was it. That was the whole arrangement. My brother is 4 years older than me. He has a very specific talent for starting things and a very specific inability to finish them. He dropped out of business school after 1 semester. He left his sales job after 8 months. He got into real estate, then dropped it. He tried to flip a house with money he borrowed from our dad, and it didn't go the way he planned. None of it ever went the way he planned. So when he told the family, at Thanksgiving dinner, the November before everything fell apart, that he had a new idea, a property management app, something that was going to disrupt the rental market in the Pacific Northwest, I smiled and passed the sweet potatoes and said very little. I should have said more. I know that now. I found out what happened on a Tuesday in March, 8 months into my contract in Denver. My brother called me, which was unusual. We didn't talk much, and when we did it was usually my mother facilitating it somehow. He sounded strange, not upset exactly, more like a person who has already made their peace with something and is calling to inform you rather than to discuss. He said, "I wanted you to hear it from me first." I remember standing in my kitchen in Denver with a coffee mug in my hand, still half asleep, and something in my stomach went cold before he even said the next part. He told me that he'd moved into my apartment, that he and my parents had talked it over and decided the space was just sitting there, and it made more sense for him to use it as a live workspace while he built out his app. He said he'd moved in 3 weeks ago. He said he thought I'd be fine with it. I asked him if he had a key. He said Mom had given him the spare. I set down my coffee mug on the counter very slowly. I asked him to repeat what he just said. He did. I asked him if he understood whose name was on the lease. He said it wasn't a lease situation, it was my property, and that's exactly why they figured it was fine. Family doesn't need to sign paperwork to help family. I told him to put Mom on the phone. She didn't answer. He said she was busy. I hung up and called her directly. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting it. The conversation was short. She said they'd talked about it and thought it was the practical choice. She said the apartment was just sitting empty and my brother needed a stable place to work. She said I could come home and use the guest bedroom anytime I wanted. She said the whole thing was temporary and I was making it bigger than it needed to be. Then she said the thing that I have been turning over in my mind ever since. She said, "You can live anywhere, sweetheart. You're young. You're flexible." I want you to sit with that for a second. My mother, standing in her kitchen in the house she owns, told me that I could live anywhere, about my apartment, the one my grandmother gave me. I said, "Okay," and I hung up. I didn't call a lawyer that day. I didn't do anything dramatic. I sat on my kitchen floor in Denver for about 40 minutes and did that thing where you're too angry to cry and too sad to be properly furious, so you just kind of exist in the space between the two of them. Then I got up, went to work, sat through a 3-hour meeting about zoning variance applications, came home, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was pull up the property records from my grandmother's apartment. I wanted to see my own name in writing. I needed that anchor. It was there, exactly where it had always been. Recorded with Multnomah County, transferred to me via her estate in 2021. No liens, no encumbrances. My name, my address in Denver, my signature from the transfer paperwork. The second thing I did was call a friend of mine from college named Petra. Wait, no, I can't use that name. A friend I'd known since college. She'd gone to law school and was now practicing real estate law in Seattle. We weren't the kind of close where we talked every week, but she was the kind of person who, when something mattered, you called. I texted her first. I said, "Can I call you?" Something weird happened. She called me back in 10 minutes. I explained the whole thing. She was quiet for most of it. When I finished, she asked me a few questions. Was I the sole owner? Had I ever given anyone power of attorney? Had I signed anything giving my parents or brother permission to occupy or manage the property? The answer to all three was no. She said, "Okay, so here's where you stand." She explained it simply. My brother moving in without my consent was unlawful occupation. It didn't matter that he was family. It didn't matter that my mother had a spare key. A spare key is not a lease, is not a license to occupy, is not permission. The moment he moved his belongings in and began living there without my authorization, he became what the law calls an unauthorized occupant. And unauthorized occupants, especially ones who've been told clearly to leave, can be removed. I asked her what that looked like in practice. She said it depended on whether my brother would leave voluntarily. She said that given he was my family and had just moved in, my best move was to send a formal written notice, a demand to vacate first, give him a clear deadline, document everything. If he didn't leave, the next step was an unlawful detainer action through the county court. Then she said something that I didn't expect. She said, "There's something else you should know. Even if they somehow claim there was an informal agreement to let him stay, a verbal license, anything like that, it would be terminable at will. You can revoke it at any time. You own the property. A license to use your property is only valid as long as you allow it. The second you say no, it's over." I asked her what I owed her. She said, "Tell me how it ends." I called my mother back that night, not to argue. I had stopped wanting to argue. I called her because I wanted to give her the chance to handle this like a family before it became something else. I told her that I needed my brother out of the apartment. I told her I was giving him 30 days. I told her I was following up in writing. I kept my voice level. I told her I loved her and I wasn't interested in fighting, but this was not something I was willing to negotiate. She told me I was being dramatic. She told me my brother was finally doing something with his life, and I was getting in the way of it because of a sentimental attachment to an old apartment. She told me Grandma would have wanted us to help each other. That last one landed somewhere painful. I won't pretend it didn't. My grandmother was the most generous person I have ever known, but I also know that she left that apartment to me specifically, not to the family, not to my parents, not to my brother. She knew exactly what she was doing. She and I had talked about it more than once in the last years of her life. She said she wanted me to have something that was mine, just mine. I told my mother that I understood her perspective. And then I told her again, 30 days. She hung up. I sent the written notice the next morning. I had my friend review it. It was straightforward, a formal demand to vacate addressed to my brother, sent via certified mail to the apartment address with a copy emailed to both him and my parents. It stated clearly that he was occupying the property without authorization, that no verbal or implied agreement existed, and that he had 30 days to remove himself and his belongings before I would pursue legal remedies. The response I got 4 days later was not from my brother. It was from my father. He sent me a long email, 3 paragraphs. The tone was measured. My father has always been the measured one, but the content was not. He said that my brother had been struggling for years, and this was the first time in a long time that he'd seen real momentum. He said the family had always supported my ambitions and it was time for me to return the favor. He said that by the time my contract in Denver ended, my brother might not even need the space anymore, and I could come home to a clean apartment and a successful brother, and everyone would be better off. He closed by saying he hoped I would think about what kind of family I wanted to have. I read that email 3 times. I thought about it overnight, and then I wrote back a single paragraph. I said I hoped my brother would find success with his business. I said I had thought carefully about the kind of family I wanted to have. I said my answer hadn't changed. 30 days. Here's what I didn't know during all of this was also happening. While I was sending formal notices from my Denver apartment and my parents were writing me emails about family loyalty, my brother had been busy. He hadn't just moved in. He'd done what my brother always does. He'd thought big, moved fast, and skipped about 14 steps in between. He had approached the building's property manager. He had represented himself as having authority over the unit. He had inquired about converting the apartment from residential use to a live work designation, which in Portland, under certain zoning conditions, you can sometimes do, and in doing so had signed a preliminary form with the building management indicating intent to pursue the reclassification. He signed that form with his own name, not mine. The building manager, a careful woman who had managed that property for 11 years, looked at the county records before she went any further. She pulled up the ownership information. She saw my name. She saw that the name on the form she'd been given, my brother's name, did not match the name of the owner of record. She called the number on file for the unit owner. That number was mine. I was in a lunch meeting when she called. I saw the Portland area code and stepped outside to take it. She introduced herself, explained her role, and then said very carefully that she wanted to confirm the owner's intentions regarding the reclassification request, because the person who had come in to discuss it was not the owner of record. I told her just as carefully that I had not authorized any reclassification. I told her I had not authorized anyone to act on my behalf regarding the property. I told her the person who had come to see her was my brother, who was currently occupying the unit without my consent, and that I had already issued him a formal notice to vacate. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I see. I'll note that in the file. The request will not proceed." She paused, and then she added, and I think she was being kind, not official, when she said this, "You may want to speak with an attorney about the occupancy situation, if you haven't already. We take unauthorized claims of authority over units very seriously, and there may be a record here that's useful to you." I thanked her. I went back inside. I sat down at the lunch table and I smiled and nodded at whatever was being discussed, because I was in a meeting and I was a professional, and inside I was completely calm in a way I had not been in weeks. When I told my friend what the building manager had told me, she said two things. The first was, he signed a form claiming authority he didn't have. That's not nothing. The second was, does your brother know that you know? He didn't. Not yet. I had 2 weeks left in the 30-day window. I let them run. I didn't call. I didn't email. I went to work. I did my job. I went to the gym in the evenings, and I watched too much television and I waited. On day 31, I got a text from my brother. It said, "I'm not leaving. You're being selfish and you're going to regret this." I forwarded it to my friend. She said, "Good. That's a refusal on record. We can file." I came back to Portland the second weekend in April. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I took an early flight, rented a car at PDX, and drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks from the apartment building. I sat there with a coffee and a croissant that I didn't eat, and I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the way her apartment smelled, the lavender and the old wood, and the specific quality of light that came through the west-facing window in the late afternoon. I thought about the last conversation we had before she got sick, sitting at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, telling me that she'd been thinking about what to do with the apartment, and she'd made up her mind. She looked at me and said, "It's yours, not because I love you more, because you need something that belongs to you." I paid for my coffee and I drove to my parents' house. My mother answered the door. She looked surprised, not unhappy to see me, just surprised. She said, "You didn't call." I said, "No, I didn't." She let me in. My father was in the living room. My brother was there too, which I hadn't expected. Or maybe I had, somewhere underneath the part of me that was still hoping for a different version of the story. We sat down. I didn't accept the offer of coffee. I put a folder on the coffee table. Inside were the demand to vacate, the certified mail receipt, my brother's text message printed out. the call log from the building manager with a written summary I put together myself, and a one-page letter from my friend outlining the legal situation. I explained it, not angrily, just clearly. I told them that I had given 30 days notice and it had been refused. I told them that my brother had attempted to file a reclassification request with the building management using authority he did not have. I told them that I had spoken with the building manager, that there was a record of his misrepresentation, and that I had been advised this could constitute additional legal exposure. I told them I was prepared to file an unlawful detainer action with Multnomah County the following Monday if my brother had not begun removing his belongings by the end of the weekend. My brother said, "You're seriously going to take me to court?" I said, "I'm seriously going to take you to court." My father started to say something about keeping this in the family. I said I had tried to keep it in the family for 31 days. My mother said I was being cold. I thought about telling her that she was the one who'd handed over my spare key without asking me, but I didn't. I just looked at her and said, "I'm being clear, that's not the same thing." The room was quiet for a moment. My brother said, "What does it even matter? You live in Denver." And there it was, the thing underneath all of it. The assumption that because I wasn't standing in that apartment every day, it wasn't really mine. That ownership means presence, and presence means standing guard. And if you walk away from something for any reason, career, opportunity, a life that takes you somewhere else for a while, you forfeited your right to want it back. I said, "My name is on the deed. That's what matters?" He stared at me. He looked at the folder on the table. He looked at my parents. Neither of them said anything, and I watched something happen in his face. Not contrition, not regret, just the slow deflation of someone who has run out of angles. He said, "I need until the end of the month." I said, "You have until Sunday." He was out by Saturday. He didn't do it graciously. He left the kitchen a mess and took one of my grandmother's throw blankets that I'm almost certain he just forgot was there, or maybe didn't care about. I'm still not sure which one I believe. But he was out, and I stood in that apartment on a Saturday afternoon in late April, and the lavender was still in the window, somehow still alive, and the light was coming through exactly the way I remembered. I called my friend from my grandmother's reading chair. She asked, "How does it feel?" I said, "Like mine." She laughed. I stayed there that night. I ordered pizza and watched something forgettable on my laptop and slept in the bed where I'd slept as a child when I stayed with my grandmother on weekends. And in the morning, the light came through the west window the way it always had. And I lay there for a while, not thinking about anything in particular. My parents and I have not spoken much since then. There was a phone call, maybe 2 weeks after my brother moved out, from my mother. She said she was disappointed in how I'd handled things. I said I was disappointed in how they'd started. She said she hoped with time I'd understand that everything they did came from love. I said, "I know you love me. That's not what this was about." She didn't have an answer for that. We said goodbye and hung up. My brother never called. I don't know how his app is going. I know that's probably cold-hearted of me, and maybe with time I'll find some of the softness I used to have toward him. I'm not there yet. I'm still working through the part where 3 people I loved decided that my absence was an opportunity, and the thing my grandmother gave me to make sure I always had something solid underneath me was just sitting there waiting to be made useful for someone else's dream. But I have the apartment. I'm back in Portland now. The Denver contract ended in August, and I came home. I put a small couch in the corner that my grandmother would have hated, the kind with the low modern profile and no armrests. I kept her reading chair. I kept the chalkboard by the refrigerator, even though the grocery list she wrote is mostly faded now. I kept the lavender. I know that my grandmother left that apartment to me because she understood something I was only starting to understand, that there is a difference between the people who love you and the people who respect what belongs to you, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do for both yourself and the people in your life is to make that difference very clear. She knew I would need to learn that lesson eventually. I think she just trusted that I'd be able to handle it. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently, whether I should have called the moment my brother picked up the phone and said, "I wanted you to hear it from me first," whether I should have flown back to Portland that same week instead of waiting, whether being calm and measured and giving 30 days was the right instinct, or whether it just gave everyone more time to dig in. But here's what I keep coming back to. The outcome wasn't determined by how fast I moved. It was determined by the fact that I had documentation, I had a record, and I had never signed anything that gave anyone else authority over what was mine. The deed was my foundation. Everything else, my brother's confidence, my mother's certainty that I would eventually let it go, my father's reasonable-sounding email, all of it had nowhere to stand once it made contact with that one simple fact. There's something I think people don't talk about enough, which is how much damage gets done in families specifically because of the assumption that love is the same as permission. My parents loved me. I don't doubt that, but love isn't a legal instrument. Love doesn't transfer ownership. Love doesn't give you the right to hand over someone else's spare key and tell yourself you did it for good reasons. The confusion between those two things, between caring about someone and having authority over what belongs to them, is where so much of this kind of pain starts. And I think what my brother's situation revealed, more than anything, was a pattern that had been running for years. Every time he ran out of road, someone handed him a new road, not because it was sustainable, but because watching him struggle was uncomfortable and making the discomfort stop felt like helping. But there's a difference between helping someone and absorbing the consequences of their choices so thoroughly that they never have to sit with those consequences themselves. What my family did to me, what they did to my grandmother's apartment, was not help. It was a transfer. They took something from me and gave it to him and called that love, and I think on some level they even believed it. What I know now, that I didn't fully understand before all of this, is that holding your ground isn't the same as being unloving. I didn't cut off my family because I was cold. I held the line because the alternative was allowing a precedent, that my absence is an opportunity, that my silence is consent, that what I own is available for redistribution whenever someone else needs it more. That precedent, once established, doesn't stop at one apartment. It becomes the terms of every relationship you have with the people who set it. The building manager's phone call changed everything. Not because she did anything dramatic, she just did her job carefully and honestly. But it's a reminder that the world outside your family often operates by different rules than the ones inside it, rules that don't bend for sentiment. And sometimes that clarity is exactly what you need. I still have the lavender on the windowsill. It has survived more than I expected it to.